The Bodhicharyavatara, composed by Indian scholar Shantideva, is a pivotal text in Mahayana Buddhism, emphasizing the cultivation of compassion and wisdom. It aligns with Chandrakirti's Prasangika Madhyamaka philosophy. These teachings focus on nurturing a mind dedicated to helping others, promoting personal peace, and ultimately contributing to the well-being of all sentient beings and the environment. Such practices remain relevant today for achieving happiness and facing challenges with calmness. The 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, endorses the text's enduring importance and praises the New English translation for its accuracy and clarity. He celebrates its potential to foster global peace and harmony. The preface to the revised edition highlights the improvements made to the 1997 translation, ensuring better accuracy and readability by consulting Khenpo Kunzang Peldon's commentary and correcting past errors. Several translations of The Way of the Bodhisattva have been made from the original Sanskrit and Tibetan texts. Initially, Kate Crosby and Andrew Skilton published a Sanskrit translation, followed by Vesna and Alan Wallace's version, which also referenced Tibetan variations. Neil Elliott later published a version based on Geshe Kelsang Gyatso's explanations. Alexander Berzin produced another translation, mainly from Tibetan, but revised using the Sanskrit text. Andreas Kretschmar started translating the root text and its commentary by Kunzang Peldon, available online. These translations highlight the debate over translating from original texts versus translations, as well as differences between Western academic approaches and traditional Tibetan monastic practices. Western scholars aim for objective understanding, while Buddhists focus on spiritual implementation. Both value textual accuracy, but their methods and goals diverge, reflecting detached scholarship versus spiritual commitment. The contributions of Western scholarship, like Akira Saito's work on the textual history based on Tibetan manuscripts found in Dunhuang, are acknowledged as important in the study of these texts. There are different versions of Shantideva's poem, the Bodhicharyavatara, largely due to the unique circumstances of its publication. According to Shantideva's biography, the scholars in Magadha produced a text with 1,000 lines in 10 chapters, while those in Kashmir recorded a shorter version with 700 lines in 9 chapters. The Tibetan translation by Kawa Peltzek, possibly derived from the Kashmir manuscript, supports the 9-chapter structure found in Dunhuang manuscripts, hinting this could be Peltzek's original translation. When compared with the later canonical Tibetan version, these differences may highlight the changes over time, though they suggest a more complex history than traditional accounts. Western scholars suggest the canonical version might be an expanded version of the original text, which included additional material over centuries. Additionally, the authenticity of the Tibetan translation, which differs from the surviving Sanskrit text, raises questions. These differences might result from Tibetan translators using an alternative Sanskrit version or adapting based on oral explanations from Indian scholars. Western scholarship is well suited to address questions about the literal interpretation of the Bodhicharyavatara due to its expertise in archaeology, paleography, and textual criticism. These academic inquiries are primarily of interest to students of religious and cultural history. Buddhist practitioners, however, value the text as a guide for living, and the exact historical accuracy is less important to them. For practitioners, the authenticity of the text is validated by the experiences and realizations of generations of practitioners, not just by the identity of its author. The Bodhicharyavatara's teachings have been transmitted orally through a lineage from Indian Panditas to Tibetan translators. Although the Sanskrit version was lost in the 12th century, the Tibetan transmission remains vital. Therefore, for practice, the Tibetan version may hold more significance than a precise scholarly translation from Sanskrit. Literal translations are often preferred for accuracy, though translation should avoid contrivance and self-conscious stylization. Accurate but inelegant translations are better than elegant inventions. The text discusses the challenges of balancing literal accuracy and stylistic elegance in translation. It emphasizes that a perfect translation should evoke the same intellectual and emotional experience in its readers as the original text does for its native speakers. Translators should aim to make translations viable and engaging for those who can't read the source language, avoiding overly artificial elegance. It mentions that while achieving this balance is tough, it is crucial to preserve the original's beauty and meaning. An example given is the translation of the Bodhicharyavatara into rhythmic prose to maintain this balance. The goal is to represent the original text's grace and clarity in a way that appeals to readers, focusing on both literal accuracy and interpretative freedom as necessary. The goal of the translation was to faithfully convey Kunzang Peldon's explanations so English readers could understand Shantideva's teachings without losing their accuracy or poetic nature. The Way of the Bodhisattva, a Mahayana Buddhist classic, is about the Bodhisattva path, where individuals renounce their personal peace to help all beings achieve enlightenment. Shantideva, the author, was a unique figure at Nalanda University, known for his independent and compassionate nature. His work is a profound guide to compassion and spiritual wisdom. The text is typically divided into sections following a prayer structure to help readers understand fundamental Buddhist concepts like bodhicitta. The text outlines various chapters of a teaching by Shantideva focused on cultivating and intensifying bodhicitta, which is the enlightened mindset that aspires toward Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. Bodhicitta comprises two aspects: ultimate bodhicitta, the wisdom of emptiness, and relative bodhicitta, the practical aspiration to achieve enlightenment for others' sake. Shantideva emphasizes that these two aspects are interdependent and that the mind's true nature aligns with enlightenment, suggesting that transformation and improvement are possible. The teachings provide practical guidance to help transcend egocentric existence and develop a new, altruistic perspective. The early signs of bodhicitta are considered mysterious and wondrous because they contrast sharply with the mind's usual egocentric tendencies. Shantideva highlights the extraordinary nature of bodhicitta, suggesting it often feels like an external prompting, much like sudden lightning illuminating the night. He begins his poem with a celebration of bodhicitta to instill enthusiasm and guide the mind towards a noble goal. His method combines encouragement with the stark reminder of the dire consequences of spiritual neglect, emphasizing the importance of maintaining initial enthusiasm and preventing moral and spiritual erosion. Shantideva, following Buddhist tradition, uses both positive reinforcement and fear of suffering to strengthen mental discipline. He starkly presents human existence's fragility, impermanence, and the certainty of death, including the prospect of post-mortem suffering. This approach can shock newcomers to Buddhism, especially those from Western traditions, who might mistake it for morbid pessimism. The Buddhist view of morality focuses on cause and effect rather than divine decree. Actions are judged based on whether they cause suffering or promote happiness and spiritual growth, differing fundamentally from other religious moral frameworks. Thus, Shantideva's teachings aim to keep practitioners vigilant and dedicated to their spiritual path. Evil actions inevitably lead to suffering, according to Buddhist beliefs, not as punishment from an external power, but as a consequence of one's own actions. Suffering, even if intense, is temporary and subject to change. This perspective minimizes guilt and emphasizes personal responsibility and freedom. Shantideva, in The Way of the Bodhisattva, highlights the reality of suffering in lower realms to teach and show the Bodhisattva's compassion. This compassion is courageous and unsparing, aiming to save all beings from suffering without judgment. Unlike the moral indignation some might feel towards wrongdoers, Shantideva's view is rooted in compassion and wisdom, transcending conventional concepts of right and wrong. In Buddhism, samsara refers to the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, where all experiences are influenced by past actions, leading to inevitable suffering. Shantideva emphasizes that compassion should be directed toward all beings equally, as there are no purely innocent victims in samsara. The Bodhisattva's vow is to alleviate suffering by teaching the path to transcend samsara through values and wisdom. Shantideva's teachings are optimistic, suggesting that suffering can be avoided by changing our actions and thoughts. Confession in Buddhism involves openly acknowledging past behaviors to facilitate personal change. Shantideva urges commitment to this transformative path for spiritual growth. Shantideva in his text emphasizes the need for maintaining and protecting bodhicitta, the mind aimed at enlightenment. He reflects on the serious commitment he has made, understanding the hesitation but pushing forward by describing the severe consequences of abandoning this vow. Shantideva outlines a mental training path that is spiritually deep and psychologically insightful, encouraging us to realize that human life is a crucial opportunity for spiritual development, often wasted on trivialities. He stresses that emotional defilements like anger and lust are the true dangers, as they are just fleeting thoughts causing suffering. The real battle is within our minds, and by adopting a strong, determined attitude, we can combat these negative emotions. Shantideva concludes that even though the conflict against defilements appears daunting, they are merely thoughts and can be overcome through rigorous mental effort. Shantideva emphasizes that mental issues and emotions come from within, and the key to overcoming these problems is developing self-awareness. He teaches that the mind is the root of both suffering and joy, and it can be trained and controlled. Vigilant introspection is crucial. Constantly monitoring thoughts to prevent negative impulses from turning into actions is vital. Shantideva advises continuous mindfulness and self-scrutiny even in mundane daily activities, as every action impacts the world. He highlights the importance of recognizing our unhealthy attachment to our physical bodies and urges a shift in perspective to reduce suffering. The mind often engages in unrealistic thoughts when it comes to supporting the body and others. Though it might yearn for something, it often finds it repellent upon closer look. Shantideva, a Buddhist teacher, does not reject the body but stresses that the mind should not be obsessed with it. Patience, discussed in detail in Shantideva's work, is seen as the highest form of self-discipline and is essential for controlling anger, which Buddhism considers the most dangerous mental factor. Anger destroys all spiritual progress and must be eliminated, even when justified by perceived injustices. Shantideva emphasizes that all conflicts and hostile situations should be faced with patience and resilience, which he views as true heroism. He argues that anger adds to suffering, and patience helps in spiritual growth. Shantideva challenges readers to look beyond surface-level irritations and respond with calmness and understanding, ultimately transforming suffering into a tool for compassion and spiritual progress. Illness causes physical discomfort due to bodily imbalances, and while we dislike the pain, it's irrational to be angry about it. Similarly, the hostile behavior of enemies arises from causes and conditions, often due to their own emotional issues. It's unjustified to see them as enemies when they too suffer. Understanding that aggressors act under the influence of their defilements makes their hostility easier to handle. Shantideva suggests that there is no use in anger, since enemies either inherently harbor hostility, like fire being hot, or temporarily succumb to defilements, like smoke in the sky. Additionally, aggression involves mutual dependence between the victim and the aggressor, both contributing to the pain experienced. Enemies harm us, which is a result of our own karma from past actions, meaning they aren't solely aggressors. Paradoxically, their hostility leads to our patience and purification, aiding our spiritual growth. Therefore, enemies, much like blessings, provide crucial opportunities for virtue and should be valued. Shantideva argues that we should cherish our enemies as they help us progress on the Bodhisattva path by revealing our own egotism and fostering patience. Finally, Shantideva stresses the importance of intensifying bodhicitta, the enlightened mind, emphasizing urgency and the harsh realities of death and rebirth to encourage fervent dedication to spiritual practice. This passage conveys Shantideva's teachings about the urgency and importance of utilizing human life wisely to avoid negative karmic consequences and the suffering of hell. Despite his emphasis on the dangers of complacency, highlighting the deep-rooted karmic residues that can lead to one's downfall, Shantideva remains hopeful. He encourages taking full advantage of the present opportunity to free oneself from sorrow, stressing the need for courage and perseverance. Through careful attention and introspection, individuals can achieve profound mental transformation. Shantideva underscores the necessity of reducing involvement in worldly affairs to enhance concentration, whether one is a monk or a layperson. The company one keeps is crucial, as an unreflective lifestyle, influenced by materialistic values, will lead to frustration. The text ultimately focuses on developing inner discipline and resolve to achieve spiritual liberation. Shantideva advises people to seek solitude for inner freedom and peace of mind. He suggests avoiding worldly ties and emphasizes that desire for companionship and property can distract from spiritual progress. For managing physical desire, particularly sexual obsessions, he recommends focusing on the unattractive aspects of the body and mocks social rituals of courtship and marriage. He highlights that both monastics and lay people must transcend physical desire and materialism because they both lead to delusion. Shantideva also stresses the importance of meditation on the equality and exchange of self and others. This involves understanding that the separation between self and others is an illusion, leading bodhisattvas to feel and act to relieve others' suffering as if it were their own. These teachings can be challenging to understand, but they are central to the Bodhisattva path in Mahayana Buddhism. The text covers the importance of compassion and wisdom in Buddhist teachings, particularly in the context of the Tibetan commentary by Kunzang Pelden. Compassion is rooted in understanding emptiness, which makes Buddhist teachings both meaningful and practical. Shantideva emphasizes the exchange of self and others to practice compassion and reach the essence of Buddhist wisdom. This idea is encapsulated in his verse that joy comes from wishing happiness for others, while misery comes from selfish desires. Shantideva suggests a unique meditation technique to confront the ego by imagining the perspective of an opponent, fostering emotional understanding and reducing self-centeredness. This practice is further explained by Kunzang Pelden. Moreover, grasping the true sense of equality and exchange requires a deep understanding of emptiness. The 9th chapter on wisdom is crucial but complex, central to understanding the Bodhisattva path. Shantideva argues that all practices leading up to this chapter aim at realizing emptiness, an essential aspect of true compassion. He follows the Madhyamaka or middle way tradition, founded by Nagarjuna, which remains vital in Buddhist teachings. After Buddha's death, various schools emerged to interpret his teachings, leading to the creation of different systems like Vaibhashika, Sautrantika, Madhyamaka, and Vijñanavada. These systems reflect the varied ways Buddha's teachings were adapted for different audiences to help them achieve liberation from suffering. The Mahayana tradition addresses the contradictions by categorizing Buddha's teachings into definitive, true meaning, and expedient, provisional. It also distinguishes between ultimate truth, actual nature, and relative truth, apparent nature. Buddha's teachings often adapted to the learner's capacities, using relative language for practical understanding. But ultimate truth, being beyond rational grasp, cannot be fully expressed conceptually. Thus, Madhyamaka emphasizes the rejection of all fixed views, considering any conceptual claim of ultimate reality as inadequate. The Madhyamaka philosophy argues that ultimate truth is beyond ordinary reasoning and verbal expression. It promotes a type of intuitive knowledge, which transcends typical thought processes. The goal is to reach an awareness that is free from conceptual thinking and theories, focusing on immediate insight known as prajna. Shantideva, an important figure in this philosophy, teaches that when the mind is devoid of all concepts, it becomes perfectly at rest. Madhyamaka uses a method of logical analysis to show the inconsistencies in various doctrines, illustrating that all rational constructs ultimately contain contradictions. This approach is not about establishing new doctrines, but about revealing the limitations of reason, leading to a mental stillness that allows for deeper understanding. This resembles Kantian critique, but extends further, using criticism to cultivate wisdom and a spiritual path. Shantideva's work, particularly in the 9th chapter of the Bodhicharyavatara, provides an extensive overview of these arguments and their philosophical implications. Nagarjuna critiques several early Hindu philosophical schools, and his disciple Aryadeva focuses on Hindu philosophies such as Mimamsa and Nyaya Vaisheshika. Their approach is followed by a critical assessment of the Buddhist Vijñanavada school based on Chandrakirti's arguments. Shantideva, identified with the Prasangika branch of the Madhyamaka school, integrates the concept of emptiness into his teachings, emphasizing its necessity for Bodhisattva training. In the 9th chapter of his work, Shantideva highlights that wisdom of emptiness is indispensable for overcoming suffering and misconceptions about real existence. The Way of the Bodhisattva, originally translated into Tibetan in the 8th century and reworked over time, has remained integral to Tibetan Buddhism, inspiring many generations of practitioners and scholars. Patrul Rinpoche was a highly influential teacher of Tibetan Buddhism who lived as a wandering hermit with no property. He focused on meditating on love and compassion, which he considered vital for spiritual practice. Known for his extraordinary memory and simple, profound teachings, he inspired many and was thought to be an embodiment of Shantideva. His teachings, especially on the Bodhicharyavatara, revived interest in essential Buddhist texts. Patrul Rinpoche had many notable disciples, including Mipham Rinpoche and the present Dalai Lama, who continue his legacy. A recent translation of the Bodhicharyavatara aims to preserve these teachings for English speakers, reflecting thorough research and consulting various previous translations. The text has been translated into verse to maintain its traditional form and aid memorization, despite the challenges involved. The text discusses the process and challenges in translating Shantideva's work, highlighting that the current translation aims to inspire future, potentially more perfect translations by skilled forward writers. The current version asks readers to be patient with translation choices and metrication constraints. It notes the need for variation in vocabulary and interpretative paraphrase, such as using doctrine for dharma and assembly for sangha. Some Sanskrit terms have been retained for familiarity and significance. The translation is not word for word, but strives to convey the spirit of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. An anecdote about the Dalai Lama blessing the Bodhicharyavatara underscores the text's importance. Acknowledgements express gratitude to contributors and teachers who made the translation possible. The text begins with verses honoring Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and explains that the author aims to cultivate their own faith and beneficial habits, hoping to inspire others similarly. Bodhicitta, the awakened mind focused on compassion and wisdom, is highly valued in Buddhist teachings. It brings immense joy and benefits to countless beings and is considered superior to all other virtues. Bodhicitta helps to alleviate the suffering of all living beings, transforming their impure nature into the pure state of a Buddha. Gaining bodhicitta can elevate those trapped in the cycle of suffering and samsara, making them children of the blissful one. It is likened to a supreme alchemical substance that purifies and transforms. People are encouraged to hold tightly to bodhicitta, as it continuously generates positive outcomes and merits, unlike other virtues that exhaust themselves after fruition. Even those who have committed grave sins can find instant redemption through bodhicitta, similar to how fire consumes all. The teachings describe bodhicitta in two aspects: intention and action. Intention is like the wish to start a journey, while action involves actively setting out to help others. Accepting bodhicitta with a firm intent results in a constant stream of merit, even during sleep or inattention. Acts of kindness, no matter how small, have boundless merit, and bodhicitta surpasses even the worship of Buddhas in terms of benefits. It brings relief and joy to all beings and eliminates suffering and ignorance, making it an unparalleled virtue. The text praises the bodhisattvas by comparing them to others who do good, but notes that bodhisattvas act out of their own will, without being asked. It highlights the virtuous nature of bodhisattvas who provide immense spiritual benefit to countless beings and are dedicated to others' happiness. Negative thoughts towards them, as warned by Buddha, lead to suffering, whereas positive thoughts bring greater benefits. The text expresses deep reverence for bodhisattvas, acknowledging their immense contributions and seeking refuge in them. It includes a detailed description of lavish offerings to the Buddhas and bodhisattvas as a sign of profound respect and devotion, emphasizing the importance of generous and thoughtful giving, even from those who may feel they have little to offer. This text is about making elaborate offerings to the Buddhas and bodhisattvas to show reverence and respect. It describes arranging precious items like lamps, flowers, pearls, and gems while offering prostrations, praises, and refuge in the triple gem, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. The author expresses sincere repentance for past wrongdoings and seeks protection and guidance. They acknowledge the inevitability of death and the fleeting nature of life, contemplating their actions and seeking to cleanse their soul before passing away. The speaker reflects on past mistakes and regrets over evil actions committed for temporary gains. Realizing the horror of these acts, they express extreme fear of death and seek refuge in the Buddha and various Bodhisattvas, imploring them for protection and mercy. The speaker acknowledges their transgressions and vows to turn away from sin, emphasizing the importance of following the teachings of compassionate figures to escape the cycle of suffering. They conclude by committing to confess their wrongs and amend their behavior, celebrating the virtue that alleviates suffering and rejoicing in the happiness of others. The speaker expresses joy in virtuous actions that lead to enlightenment and the relief of suffering. They pray for the guidance of Buddhas to help beings in pain and request enlightened beings to remain and assist others. The speaker wishes to alleviate all forms of suffering, offering their body, possessions, and merits selflessly. They aspire to become a source of support, nourishment, and comfort for all living beings, akin to essential elements like earth and space. Committed to the Bodhisattva path, they aim to nurture the mind of enlightenment and abide by its precepts, achieving a fulfilled life that benefits all sentient beings. The text discusses the significance of bodhicitta, which is the aspiration to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings. The speaker, who sees themselves as the Buddha's child, vows to live up to the high standards of this noble lineage. They compare discovering bodhicitta to finding a precious gem and describe it as a remedy for suffering and a source of immense joy and liberation. The speaker stresses the importance of carefulness and commitment to the bodhicitta path, cautioning against making promises without fulfilling them. They underscore the severe consequences of failing to uphold these promises and the impact on all beings. Those who deviate from the bodhisattva path face prolonged suffering and hinder their progress towards enlightenment. In conclusion, the speaker emphasizes the rarity and preciousness of human life with the chance to practice bodhicitta, urging themselves and others to act diligently to make the most of this opportunity. The poem discusses the preciousness of human life and the importance of practicing virtue to avoid falling into the suffering of lower realms, such as hell. It highlights the difficulty of gaining a human birth, the consequences of negative actions, and the continuous cycle of pain in samsara, the cycle of birth and rebirth. The author expresses the urgency of using this rare opportunity to cultivate virtue and fight against inner enemies like anger and lust. They emphasize the determination needed to overcome these deep-rooted afflictions, comparing this inner battle to struggles faced by people in various professions to make a living. The poem calls for resilience and dedication to attaining happiness and enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. The text describes a commitment to overcoming personal defilements and aiding others in their struggles. Despite acknowledging the enormity of this task, it encourages persistence and a fierce dedication to battling inner afflictions. The text suggests that these defilements are not inherent in external objects or faculties, but are like mirages that torment us needlessly. By understanding their true nature, one can conquer these adversaries. It emphasizes the importance of mindfulness in taming the mind, suggesting that all suffering and fear originate from an untamed mind. The practice of virtues like giving and discipline is portrayed as mental intentions rather than mere physical actions. By mastering the mind, one effectively overcomes all external and internal enemies. The text emphasizes the importance of controlling and guarding the mind through mindfulness and introspection. It argues that external practices are futile if the mind is distracted and unprotected. The author highlights how failure to understand and discipline the mind leads to purposeless wandering and sorrow. Protecting the mind is compared to safeguarding one's physical wounds to avoid greater suffering. Mindfulness keeps defilements and negative thoughts at bay, ensuring that virtues and vows are upheld. The text also stresses that without introspection, spiritual teachings and diligence are ineffective. Finally, it suggests maintaining mindfulness by recalling the presence of enlightened beings and remaining attentive to one's mental state, actions, and surroundings. The text emphasizes mindfulness, self-discipline, and introspection, stresses the importance of constant attention to one's mind and actions to avoid distractions and maintain concentration. Individuals should focus solely on their tasks, acting thoughtfully and refraining from speech or actions driven by emotions like anger or desire. The text advises against indulging in gossip or trivial conversations and advocates a detached approach to physical and material desires. It encourages treating others compassionately, regardless of their behavior, and maintaining selflessness. By understanding the impermanence and impurity of the body, one should foster a deep, unwavering inner strength and mindfulness, reflecting on the transient nature of life and maintaining a steady mind. The text emphasizes the impermanence and limitations of the human body. It suggests using the body wisely rather than indulging it in futile pursuits. The body should be seen as a tool for benefiting others and cultivating virtues. Practicing humility, gentleness, and positive actions is encouraged. Proper actions lead to happiness and fulfillment in this life and beyond. The text also highlights the importance of respecting others, learning from them, and acknowledging their good qualities. Ultimately, one should strive to help others and achieve greater spiritual goals. The text offers various guidelines and rules for behavior and conduct, especially for those on a spiritual path. It emphasizes modesty, respect, and cleanliness, such as covering one's head and not polluting public spaces. It advises against explaining complex teachings to those not ready or tutoring women alone. All teachings, regardless of their level, should be treated with equal reverence. Proper decorum is stressed in actions like eating, indicating directions, and interacting with others. The importance of maintaining diligent and respectful behavior, even in rest or meditation, is highlighted. Reciting certain sutras thrice daily and relying on Buddhas and Bodhisattvas purifies transgressions. The text advises mastering a wide range of knowledge to benefit others and dedicating all actions to their welfare. Maintaining commitment to virtuous teachers and following guidelines from sutras are encouraged. The maintenance of watchful introspection for one's body and mind actions is crucial. Finally, the text warns against anger, noting that even a single flash can destroy the merits accumulated over time, and urges the practice of patience as a supreme virtue. The text talks about the negative impact of anger and how it disrupts peace of mind and causes various problems, including strained relationships and lack of joy. Anger is described as an enemy that fuels discontent and leads to suffering. The author suggests that overcoming anger can bring happiness both in this life and future lives. It emphasizes the importance of maintaining a positive and steady mind, even when facing pain, insults, or hardships. The text also highlights that suffering is inevitable and often results from circumstances beyond control. It concludes by asserting that thinking calmly and rejecting anger can lead to a peaceful and virtuous life. The text discusses the nature of suffering and the appropriate response to it. It argues that external conditions and actions do not inherently affect the self, which remains unchanging. All things are interdependent, and recognizing this helps to remain calm in difficult situations. The text encourages patience as a means to cut through sorrow and suggests that negative actions by others arise from conditions and defilements. It questions the practicality of anger and highlights that individuals often cause their own misery through ignorance or attachment. It emphasizes the importance of compassion and patience over anger and retaliation, as these responses align with wisdom and self-control, helping to transform suffering into opportunities for spiritual growth. The text discusses the impermanence and futility of worldly desires and possessions, emphasizing the inevitability of death. It explains that wealth and material gains will ultimately be left behind, while sins and negative actions will follow an individual into the next life. The author argues that it is better to live a virtuous life and avoid anger and negativity, as these only cause future suffering. Cultivating mutual love and compassion, even in the face of injury and slander, is recommended. The text advises against responding to ignorance with anger and suggests instead to focus on personal virtue and the well-being of all beings. It highlights the importance of letting go of attachments and finding joy in the praise and happiness of others, as this leads to lasting, blameless happiness. The text discusses the importance of selflessness and the pitfalls of envy and pride. It emphasizes that if you truly wish for the happiness of others, you should not feel discomfort when they are pleased or successful. It argues that seeking enlightenment for the sake of all beings means you shouldn't be upset when others achieve small successes or joy. The text contrasts this with the destructive nature of envy and anger, noting that these feelings don't lead to personal benefit and can even hinder one's spiritual growth. It also discusses how praise and fame are fleeting and don't contribute to true happiness or merit. Finally, it stresses the importance of patience and the role of those who challenge us in our path to freedom from suffering, urging us to see them as helpers rather than obstacles. The text discusses the interconnectedness between beings and Buddhas, emphasizing that enemies and challenges play crucial roles in developing patience and other virtues. It argues that enemies should be seen as opportunities for growth rather than obstacles, similar to finding a treasure at home. By cultivating patience and other virtues through adversities, one honors both beings and Buddhas, as both are essential for spiritual advancement. Helping and respecting all beings is a way to repay the Buddhas for their compassion and sacrifices. The text concludes that treating beings with respect is akin to honoring the Buddhas themselves. The text emphasizes the importance of acting in ways that align with the teachings of the Buddhas to benefit oneself and others, striving to alleviate global suffering. It suggests patience and nonviolence, even towards those who cause harm, as they are influenced by greater forces. Helping others leads to happiness and enlightenment both in this life and beyond. Diligence, defined as joy in virtuous actions, is needed for spiritual progress. Laziness and indulgence in idle pleasures are condemned as they lead to negative consequences, including fear and suffering at the time of death. The text urges using one's current human life to pursue spiritual practice seriously, warning against squandering this opportunity on distractions or laziness, and stresses the necessity of self-discipline and effort in achieving true joy and avoiding future regret. The text emphasizes the practice of empathy and perseverance on the path to enlightenment. Despite doubts and fears about achieving enlightenment, it explains that with dedication, even insects can attain Buddhahood, suggesting that humans with their capacity for discernment and Bodhisattva deeds have even greater potential. The text highlights that suffering for enlightenment is manageable compared to the countless past sufferings we have endured without spiritual progress. It encourages gradually building the habit of generosity, starting with small gifts and eventually giving even one's own flesh selflessly. It also warns that our minds and bodies suffer due to sin and false views, while merit and wisdom lead to ease and happiness. Emphasizing Bodhicitta, the desire for enlightenment for the sake of all beings, it states that this motivation can burn away past misdeeds and accumulate vast merit. The journey of enlightenment, propelled by aspiration, joy, and compassionate efforts, dispels despair. Finally, it underscores that aspiration is the root of all virtue, motivating us to overcome our shortcomings and strive for the welfare of all beings. The text emphasizes meditation on actions and their outcomes. It discusses the consequences of sinful actions, resulting in pain and suffering, versus the benefits of virtuous actions, leading to honor and happiness. It encourages aspiring to and practicing virtue with devotion. The text advises carefully planning actions and commitments, avoiding arrogance, and maintaining confidence without pride. It suggests overcoming faults with steadfast resolve and self-confidence, and it highlights the importance of standing firm against defilements, likening this to a lion standing among foxes. The passage emphasizes the importance of maintaining a steadfast and conscientious path, especially for those following the teachings of the Bodhisattvas. It highlights the commitment to joy and diligence in every task, drawing parallels between focused practitioners and determined soldiers. The text also warns against letting the mind be overtaken by negative emotions or distractions, advocating for mindfulness and continual self-correction. Practitioners are encouraged to abandon worldly desires, seek solitude for concentration, and strive for calmness to overcome afflictions. The overall message is to cultivate a relentless approach towards spiritual goals, mindful of the impermanence of life and relationships. The text outlines the challenging nature of interacting with immature and inconsiderate people who are difficult to please and tend to create more harm than good. It advises avoiding close relationships with such individuals, stressing that associating with them can lead to self-aggrandizement, scorn, and vice. It promotes maintaining courteous but distant interactions, focusing on spiritual practice instead. The wise should avoid attachment, since desires and the praise or criticism of others are fleeting and ultimately unimportant. The text also reflects a longing for a solitary, unattached life in nature, free from societal pressures and closer to enlightenment. It emphasizes the transient nature of life and the inevitability of death, suggesting that true contentment and peace come from within, not from external associations. The speaker in the text decides to retreat to a forest to live in solitude, away from worldly concerns and attachments. They choose this path to avoid causing or experiencing grief when they eventually die. Emphasizing the transient and impure nature of the human body, the speaker questions the basis of lust and attachment to physical forms, pointing out that these desires are irrational and destined to bring suffering. They highlight the contradiction of protecting and adorning a body in life, only for it to be consumed by carrion after death. The speaker concludes that striving for spiritual practice and inner peace is more meaningful than pursuing fleeting physical pleasures. This text argues against physical attachment and lust, highlighting the body's impurity and transient nature. It says that human bodies are inherently filthy, comparable to excrement and worms, and yet people irrationally desire them. The text questions why people beautify their bodies when they should feel revulsion towards their inherent impurities. It critiques the pursuit of wealth and pleasure, pointing out that such pursuits often lead to suffering, exhaustion, and even enslavement. It concludes by emphasizing that material and physical desires bring endless hardship and distract from true freedom. The text emphasizes the value of detaching from cravings and desires to achieve enlightenment and inner peace. It compares the intense suffering of craving to the tranquility found in solitude, urging readers to find joy and calm in peaceful, isolated places like forests. It promotes the practice of selflessness, compassion, and the equality of all beings in their pursuit of happiness and avoidance of suffering. It argues that pain is universal and not exclusive to one person, advocating for the relief of suffering in all others as if it were one's own. This mindset fosters a compassionate, unified approach to life, where alleviating the pain of others is as essential as addressing one's own. The text emphasizes the importance of selflessness and compassion. Practicing these virtues brings immense joy and fulfillment, not just personal freedom. It suggests adopting the perspective that other beings' happiness is as important as our own, and that helping others shouldn't be for self-interest or praise, but for the satisfaction of seeing others happy. The idea is to perceive others as extensions of ourselves. When working for others, we should do it naturally, like feeding ourselves, without expecting rewards. The text also criticizes attachment to the body and warns against selfish actions, which lead to suffering. Instead, it advocates for self-sacrifice for the greater good, promising that this will lead to true happiness and excellence. It concludes that all joy comes from wishing happiness for others, while all misery comes from seeking pleasure for oneself. The text contrasts selfish behavior with the selfless actions of Buddhists. It argues that true enlightenment and joy can only be achieved by exchanging one's happiness for others' pain. Self-centeredness results in harm and suffering, while altruism brings fulfillment. The text encourages giving oneself to others, valuing every being equally, and dedicating one's faculties and possessions to the service of others. It criticizes envy, pride, and rivalry, urging instead for an understanding that respects and uplifts others. It concludes by highlighting the futility of self-serving efforts and emphasizes the importance of acting for the common good. The text emphasizes the importance of selflessness and caring for others' welfare. It criticizes the ego and encourages seeing oneself in others, dedicating one's actions to benefiting others instead of seeking personal gain. Genuine happiness and fulfillment come from helping others, and true contentment is found in selfless service. The body and personal desires are transient and insignificant. Thus, investing in self-importance and materialistic cravings leads to misery. Ultimately, the text promotes humility, introspection, and the relinquishing of selfish pursuits for the well-being of others. The text emphasizes the futility of valuing the physical body excessively, since it doesn't feel pleasure or aversion itself. Instead, it encourages using the body selflessly for the benefit of others and following the wisdom of the enlightened. It discusses the importance of wisdom in overcoming suffering, differentiating between the relative and ultimate truths. It notes that common people and those with yogic insight perceive reality differently, with ordinary people seeing phenomena as real, and yogis understanding their illusory nature. The text also explores concepts like momentariness and rebirth, asserting that illusions and sentient beings persist due to conditions and causes, and stresses that ending the causal stream leads to the cessation of illusory appearances. This text explores the nature of perception, questioning whether the mind can perceive itself and challenging the reality of phenomena. It argues that the mind cannot see itself just as a sword cannot cut itself, or a flame cannot light itself. It suggests that while some perceptions are dependent on other things, the idea that phenomena have true, independent existence is the source of sorrow. The text emphasizes that illusions and the mind cannot be the same if the mind is considered real. It challenges the reality of the mind, comparing it to a mirage, and asserts that if the mind is free of objects, all beings would be enlightened. The argument continues that understanding the illusion-like nature of things can help dispel afflictive passions, and that training in the realization of emptiness leads to relinquishing the habit of perceiving things as real. It concludes by suggesting that when the mind is free of concepts, it reaches perfect rest. The text also mentions that the efforts and prayers of Bodhisattvas and Buddhas, even after their passing, continue to benefit and satisfy the needs of beings. In this text, the writer argues about the importance and validity of the Mahayana path and the concept of emptiness in Buddhism. The author claims that offerings, whether in relative or ultimate terms, lead to merit, and similarly asserts that enlightenment cannot be achieved without understanding emptiness, which is the ultimate truth. The Mahayana tradition is defended against criticisms that it lacks certainty, or is contested by showing that other accepted traditions also face disagreements. Key points include that true monks, central to Dharma, must understand emptiness to surpass suffering, and that clinging to concepts persists without realizing voidness. The text concludes by asserting that emptiness alleviates suffering and fear by eliminating the false notion of an intrinsic I or self, thus leading to freedom from delusion. The text explores the nature of consciousness and the self, arguing that if something unconscious can know, then even a stick must have knowledge, which seems absurd. It questions whether a single consciousness can detect both forms and sounds, and suggests that consciousness cannot transform from perceiving one type to another. The text challenges the notion that consciousness remains constant if it can change modes. It discusses the idea that if all minds are unreal, what unique characteristic do they share? It asserts that a mindless self is equivalent to matter like a vase. If the self is immutable, it cannot change by combining with the mind. The text also addresses that if the self doesn't exist, there would be no link between actions and their results, questioning the concept of karmic retribution. Moreover, it points out that analytical investigation reveals no underlying self, similar to finding nothing upon cutting through banana tree fibers. It suggests that beings are imputed through ignorance, and the goal of overcoming sorrow, as conceived by ignorance, remains valid. The text emphasizes that the pride in saying I fosters sorrow, and meditation on no self is the supreme way to remedy this. Additionally, it disputes the existence of the body as a composite of its parts, questioning where the body itself resides, if not within or outside these parts, implying the body cannot be a singular, independent entity. The text argues that the concept of the body is an illusion. It compares the perception of a body to seeing a human figure in a pile of stones just because of its shape. When you break down the body into its parts and further into particles, it suggests that even these particles lack true existence. This means the body itself does not exist in a concrete form and is more like a dream or illusion. The text then questions the nature of suffering and pleasure, suggesting that feelings are not truly real because they can be overshadowed by stronger sensations. It proposes meditation and analysis as ways to understand these illusions. Further, it explores the impossibility of physical contact between particles and the lack of real interaction between consciousness and physical sensations. This leads to the conclusion that feeling and sensation do not have real being and that the mind is neither inside nor outside the body. Ultimately, it suggests that beings are naturally beyond suffering, and consciousness does not have a real, independent existence. This passage discusses the origin and understanding of phenomena, touching on complex concepts like the nature of reality, consciousness, and cause and effect. It examines the relationship between the mind and objects, arguing that neither has true, independent existence. The text critiques the idea of divine creation, particularly challenging the concept of Ishvara, a creator deity, and questioning his nature, power, and role in the creation of the universe. It points out the logical inconsistencies of asserting an omnipotent creator who is subject to various conditions and desires. Additionally, it refutes other philosophical views, such as those of the Sankhyas, believe in a permanent cause for the evolving world. The overall message underscores the interdependent and non-absolute nature of phenomena, suggesting that this understanding can lead to enlightenment or nirvana. The concept of prakriti refers to a balanced state from which the universe arises when disturbed. However, prakriti and its qualities do not truly exist as they are composed of three natures that cannot coexist. Things like sound and objects such as cloth cannot inherently possess qualities like pleasure. The argument follows that if qualities like pleasure are non-existent, their permanence or independent existence is also implausible. The text then critiques the notion that effects, like pleasure, can arise from unrelated causes, like cloth. It also explores the idea that if transient and gross states are impermanent, all things must be transient. The text addresses objections about the validity of knowledge and perception, arguing that even what is perceived clearly might be deceptive. Ultimately, through examining causes and their effects, it suggests that true existence is like an illusion, without independent reality or permanence. The text discusses the concept of beings and their existence. It states that all beings have no true origin and do not truly cease to exist. Life is compared to dreams and insubstantial things like a banana tree, where ultimate reality shows no difference between sorrow and contentment. It questions the nature of gain, loss, pleasure, sorrow, and relationships by pointing out these are all constructs. The text describes the struggles and suffering of existence, alongside fleeting moments of pleasure, emphasizing that true understanding of the world's emptiness is profound. It acknowledges the difficulties of finding wisdom and enlightenment amidst distractions and false paths. Ultimately, it expresses a desire to help others find peace and happiness, dedicating the merit of understanding and the composition to the well-being and enlightenment of all beings, wishing for their unending joy and relief from suffering. The text imagines a world transformed through the power of virtues and merits. It describes a vision where dangerous forests turn into peaceful groves and hellish pits become fragrant, beautiful places. Fiery coals turn into jewels and sharp weapons transform into harmless flowers. Those suffering in hell find joy, relief, and companionship with divine beings. Animals are freed from fear and suffering, and everyone has enough to eat and drink. The text calls for healing of the sick, freedom for the captives, strength for the weak, and kindness among all living beings. It wishes for safety and success for travelers, sailors, and those who wander lost, ensuring that they find their destinations and reunite with loved ones. This passage is a series of wishes for all beings. It desires protection for those who are wandering in dangerous places, and for everyone to be free from bondage, possessing wisdom, faith, and love. It prays for unrestricted wealth, without harm or enmity, and for all beings to gain beauty, strength, and perfection. It emphasizes humility, discouraging arrogance, and seeks for everyone to forsake evil ways and embrace goodness. It requests that beings never part from Bodhicitta, awakened mind, and stay committed to Bodhisattva actions, being accepted as disciples by the Buddhas. The wish is for long, content lives with no fear of death, in lands richly adorned with bodhisattvas and teachings of the Dharma. It also prays for harmonious and prosperous environments, where monks and nuns can practice and flourish in their spiritual paths. There is a hope that beings bypass the suffering of lower realms, instead achieving enlightenment and happiness. The passage concludes with the aspiration for all beings to attain their spiritual goals and for the intentions of bodhisattvas to be fulfilled. The author Shantideva composed a work about attaining perfect happiness through the teachings of Mindfulness. He describes living a simple monastic life, seeking solitude, and wishing for direct guidance from Mindfulness. He aims to act like Manjushri to help all beings and vows to remain as long as needed to alleviate their sorrows. Shantideva also prays for the enduring presence of the doctrine, the source of true happiness, and acknowledges the help and inspiration from his teachers and companions. The text concludes with mentioning the various scholars and translators who contributed to its Tibetan translation and finalization. Finally, it summarizes Shantideva's life, highlighting his devotion from a young age, his noble deeds, and his encounters with Manjughosha. Shantivarman, a prince destined to be king, had a dream where the deity Manjughosha claimed the throne. Understanding this as a sign, Shantivarman renounced his claim to the throne and became a monk named Shantideva at Nalanda Monastery. He was misunderstood by fellow monks due to his quiet lifestyle, earning the nickname Busuku. To test him, the monks asked him to teach. He agreed and wowed everyone by expounding the Bodhicharyavatara, with Manjushri appearing to give him further validation. As he taught, both Shantideva and Manjushri ascended into the sky. The monks wrote down his teachings, but the texts varied in length, leading to uncertainty. Shantideva, a Buddhist scholar, advised reading the Shikshasamuccaya and occasionally looking at the Sutrasamuccaya. He was later found living in the south, and 2 scholars went to invite him back. Though he couldn't return, he confirmed the correct texts were hidden in his monastic cell at Nalanda and provided teachings and instructions. Shantideva traveled east, resolved a conflict through miraculous powers, and converted 500 non-Buddhists by feeding them during a famine with a rice bowl he blessed. During another famine, he revived 1,000 starving beggars. Shantideva then became the bodyguard of King Arivishana, using a wooden sword imbued with Dharma power to protect him, earning universal respect. When accused of being a fraud, he demonstrated the sword's power by causing the king's eye to fall out and then miraculously restoring it. The king and country embraced Buddhism. Shantideva later moved to Sri Parvata, lived as a beggar, and sustained himself on dishwater. He was observed by a servant woman who noticed boiling water splash when it touched him. At the time, a Hindu teacher challenged Shantideva and other Buddhist teachers to prove their superiority by destructive magic against his magic or surrender their Buddhist beliefs. A king needed help to destroy a mandala created by a Hindu yogi. Unable to find anyone capable, the king learned about Shantideva from a servant. Shantideva accepted the challenge with specific preparations. Amid growing fear, Shantideva entered deep concentration and generated a powerful hurricane that swept away the mandala, terrifying the people and capturing the yogi in the wind. Shantideva then illuminated a path for the king and queen, helped them, and gathered the scattered people. He introduced many to Buddhism, destroyed non-Buddhist worship sites, and established Buddhist centers, turning the area into a Buddhist stronghold. Historically, Shantideva, well known by the 8th century, authored the widely translated and acclaimed Bodhicharyavatara. His work significantly impacted Buddhism's spread in Tibet, and details about his life, preserved in Tibetan tradition, are likely grounded in historical facts. Shantideva, a Buddhist monk from Nalanda, composed 3 significant works, including the Bodhicharyavatara. This text focuses on Mahayana Buddhist teachings, notably the meditation on the equality of self and others, emphasizing compassion. It explains that self and other are mental constructs without a solid, inherent existence. Achieving egolessness is key to realizing this equality and cultivating compassion for all beings who, like us, seek happiness, and wish to avoid suffering. An essential practice involves viewing the collective of all beings as interconnected, much like different parts of one's own body, and protecting them as one would protect oneself. The text discusses the concept of self and others, using the analogy of caring for one's body. It highlights that the body is simply a collection of parts, and the term body is an arbitrary label. Similarly, the idea of I and mine is based on a mental construct rather than an inherent truth. The text goes on to explain that a bodhisattva, or enlightened being, can expand their sense of self to include all sentient beings, thereby caring for others' suffering as their own. This deep empathy is exemplified by both advanced practitioners and ordinary cases, such as a mother's instinctive connection to her child's pain. The piece concludes by arguing that caring for others can arise naturally, without long habituation, demonstrated through everyday examples, such as the change in a person's concern when they buy a horse. The text discusses the concept of the self and others as a matter of perspective and labeling, similar to how a horse can be identified as belonging to someone. Just as I is a subjective label, there is no absolute distinction between I and other, it's just conceptual. This viewpoint encourages empathy in the treatment of others' suffering as one's own, as taught in Buddhist Dharma. The text explains that it's possible to cultivate this attitude naturally, without extensive training, as shown through examples like someone valuing a horse as soon as they are given it. Furthermore, although it may seem difficult to develop this mindset, Buddha has said that with proper training, the mind is easy to guide. Shantideva argues that since all beings want happiness and avoid suffering, there's no rational reason not to work for others' happiness and alleviate their suffering just as we do for ourselves. This understanding underscores the importance of training the mind to develop compassion and empathy towards others. The text explains that future suffering, whether severe or subtle, doesn't harm us in the present moment. It's irrational to protect ourselves from such future pains now. The misconception is thinking our present and future selves, or moments, are the same. Our experiences and karma lead to different outcomes in life and rebirths, but there's no direct transfer from one life to the next. When someone's life ends, a new consciousness begins in a new form, shaped by past karma but distinct from the old. Transition of conditions and actions is complex, guided by interdependence and beyond simple human understanding. The text discusses how karma's effects are persistent and momentary phenomena create distinct moments of consciousness. It then explains the practice of exchanging self and other, which involves placing oneself in the position of others to understand their perspective. This meditation generates empathy and counters pride, rivalry, and jealousy. Through imagining oneself as someone inferior, equal, or superior, one experiences feelings like envy, competition, and pride from different viewpoints. The practice aims to cultivate compassion and lessen self-centered thoughts. The text explains how to tackle pride by putting yourself in the shoes of those who suffer from your actions and developing compassion. It suggests that recognizing the relativity of talents and qualities can help overcome arrogance. The practice involves realizing that everyone, regardless of their status or abilities, deserves respect and help. It advocates for showing humility, understanding others' sufferings, and providing practical assistance to those in need. This mindset and actions align with true bodhisattvas' behavior, who compassionately carry others' burdens. The text discusses how to view rivalry and pride differently to overcome negative emotions. It suggests imagining yourself in the position of being competitive with someone similar to you, aiming to surpass them in reputation and possessions. It emphasizes making your own strengths known while concealing your faults and exposing your rival's weaknesses. This reflection helps you recognize and address your competitive faults. Additionally, it suggests imagining yourself as someone superior who looks down on another with pride. This perspective makes you realize the pettiness of pride and the satisfaction it brings, and it encourages undermining any sense of superiority. This method aims to reduce jealousy and pride by making you aware of their negative impact, ultimately leading you to help others rather than compete with them. When people act arrogantly towards you, instead of feeling resentful, Try to understand their perspective by imagining yourself in their position. Reflect on your own feelings and whether you too might act with pride in their place. This can help you understand their behavior and treat them with respect rather than hostility. The text discusses several points related to Tibetan Buddhism and its translations. 1. Bhava-viveka faced criticism, and all Tibetan Buddhist schools consider Prasangika Madhyamaka as the top philosophy. 2. Key translators include Kawa Peltzek, early 9th century, a student of Shantarakshita and Guru Rinpoche, Rinchen Zangpo 958-1051, and Gok Lodin Sharab 1059-1109. 3. Patrul Rinpoche Jigme Choki Wangpo 1808-1887 wrote The Words of My Perfect Teacher. 4. Those Who Go in Bliss is a title for Buddhas. Dharmakaya means Dharma body with dual interpretations. 5. Bodhisattvas, the heirs of Buddhas, are translated to reflect inclusivity. 6. To achieve enlightenment, one needs 8 freedoms, avoidance of unfortunate rebirths, and 10 forms of wealth or endowment, positive conditions and opportunities. 7. Muni, sage, translates as mighty sages for Buddhas. 8. Maitreya is the future Buddha, and Tathagata means one thus gone, another term for Buddha. The Subahu Paripricha Sutra, lost in original Sanskrit but preserved in Chinese, explores various Buddhist concepts and figures. Rishis were ancient Indian sages who transmitted the Vedas, existing between gods and humans. It mentions Brahma as the creator and explains, those who wander through the world refers to sentient beings migrating through samsara. Important bodhisattvas include Samantabhadra, prayer, Manjughosha, wisdom, and Avalokiteshvara, compassion. Jewels of Sacred Dharma refers to the scriptures, divided into 12 categories, like sutras, poetic epitomes, and prophecies. Prostration in practice involves imagining multiple bodies prostrating. Some terms like sin need redefinition to fit Buddhist context. Yama symbolizes death, and Akashagarbha and Shitagarbha are major bodhisattvas. States in Buddhism arise from past actions, and at death, only an individual's own virtues or evils matter. There are 2 types of negative actions, inherently evil actions like killing and lying, and actions that break Buddhist vows. According to Buddhist teachings, beings experience 6 realms based on their karma. 3 unfortunate realms, animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings, and 3 fortunate realms, humans, gods, and demigods. Beings in lower realms suffer more and have less ability to generate positive karma. Shantideva acknowledges that even in higher realms, happiness and suffering coexist. The path to Buddhahood involves progressing through 10 levels of realization, starting from a direct realization of emptiness. These pathways include stages such as seeing, meditation, and learning, leading to perfect Buddhahood, where the Bodhisattva no longer falls back into ordinary existence. The 7 traditional actions for accumulating merit are also described, including homage, offering, confession, and dedication. The text also references the Antara Kalpa, an era of extreme decline in human quality and life expectancy, and highlights a story from the Lotus Sutra where Shariputra, a disciple of Buddha, demonstrates extreme generosity by giving his right hand to a demon who ultimately rejects it. Shariputra gave up on the Mahayana path after a discouraging incident and sought arhatship instead. Understanding the teachings of a Buddha requires good karma and merit. Encountering the Dharma now is significant, emphasizing the need of a good spiritual teacher. Karma results inevitably from actions and affects all beings, including animals. Ignorance and instinctual habits are major sufferings outside the human state. Purifying oneself is crucial to help others, and descriptions of hell realms in Buddhist teachings serve as a motivation for ethical behavior. The triple world includes realms of desire, form, and formlessness, with the desire realm having 6 states. Compassionate actions may relax strict monastic rules, and different meditations can counteract negative emotions. Field of excellence refers to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and field of benefits includes those who help, like parents and friends. The Mahayana tradition emphasizes compassion towards all suffering beings and practices 6 essential virtues: generosity, ethical discipline, patience, diligence, concentration, and wisdom. In certain situations, compassionate actions deemed non-virtuous can be morally acceptable. Mahayana teachings are profound in their wisdom of emptiness and vast in their activities. Ethical rules, such as avoiding being alone with the opposite sex, are part of monastic life. Mahayana texts like the Triskandhaka Sutra, Akashagarbha Sutra, and works by Shantideva stress following ethical practices and treating the spiritual teacher with utmost reverence and devotion. Shantideva also critically addresses common attitudes towards enemies, maintaining that anger and hostility lack an independent basis. Shantideva argues that both inanimate and animate sources of suffering are driven by external factors, making it irrational to be angry at them. Just as it's unreasonable to blame a tree for damaging a car when it falls, it's also unreasonable to blame human aggressors, who act out of their own emotional turmoil. Shantideva challenges the notion that humans are fully accountable for their actions, suggesting that emotions like hostility contradict the idea of a permanent, unchanging self. He critiques non-Buddhist Indian philosophies that see the self as an independent and permanent entity, arguing that if the self were truly unchangeable, it couldn't experience temporary emotions like anger. This understanding helps in reducing and controlling one's own aggressive responses. Nyaya-Vaisheshika schools represent two extremes in metaphysical thought, and refuting them also refutes in-between positions, which is why Shantideva pairs their theories. Razor trees are part of the neighboring hells around hot hells. Enjoying honors and reputation is inappropriate for monks like gambling or drinking. Reverence towards someone with perfect love brings positive karmic effects, highlighting the importance of love for others. Shantideva's concept of diligence translates to a joyful, enthusiastic effort, embodying courage and perseverance. Though sleep and sex are natural, asking monks about their enjoyment of these seems odd unless referring to sexual misconduct. Worldly gods live long but are not immortal. Human life is brief. Buddhist practices for achieving enlightenment are detailed in Chapter 8. Shravakas, or Hinayana disciples, aim for personal liberation, not universal compassion like bodhisattvas, and attain arhatship instead of Buddhahood. In Sukhavati, the pure land of Buddha Amitabha, beings progress swiftly to enlightenment. The Vajradvaja Sutra explains that bodhisattvas work for the liberation of all beings despite obstacles, similar to how the sun illuminates everything regardless of shadows. The text explains various concepts from Shantideva's works, emphasizing the importance of confidence and self-assurance in overcoming negative behaviors and fostering positive qualities. It distinguishes between two types of pride, positive confidence and negative arrogance. The text also clarifies terms and addresses textual discrepancies, highlighting the importance of understanding the deeper meanings behind Shantideva's teachings on ethical and philosophical practices. These practices include the resolve to avoid afflictions, the nature of wholesome disillusionment with worldly suffering, and the compassionate actions of bodhisattvas. The final part discusses the complexity and specialized nature of the 9th chapter of Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, which requires extensive commentary for proper understanding. Explaining complex perspectives from different philosophical views in parentheses may confuse readers instead of help them. The text highlights the smooth flow and brilliance of the 9th chapter in a book, aiming to simplify comprehension through explanatory paraphrases. It follows Kunzang Peldon's interpretation and his teacher's views. The text also clarifies terms like relative truth, appearance of things in everyday life, and conventional truth, phenomena as conceived by the ordinary mind. It references the progress of Buddhist yogis on the paths to enlightenment and mentions the reordering of some stanzas based on commentaries. It touches upon significant figures like Mahakashyapa and Avalokiteshvara, and includes geographic and mythological references from Buddhist cosmology. The text underscores that a phrase suggesting all women become men is not meant literally, but rather implies that women should have the same physical strength and benefits as men. It goes on to explain various concepts and historical figures in Buddhism. Pratyeka Buddha refers to a solitary practitioner who achieves enlightenment without a teacher. Perfect joy is the first stage in the Bodhisattva path. The text mentions historical figures such as Shakya Lodro, Bhuten, and Taranatha, alongside their works and contributions to Buddhism. It notes disagreements in historical accounts about the sequence of events in Shantideva's life, highlighting different scholarly perspectives and cultural influences. The text concludes with a description of criteria for composing Shastras, Buddhist commentaries, and Shantideva's activities at Nalanda. In modern Gujarat, Shantideva, a renowned spiritual figure, became accomplished in a meditative practice dedicated to the Bodhisattva Manjushri, aimed at enhancing intelligence. Shantideva integrated part of his ordaining abbot's name into his own, a tradition still honored today. Spiritual growth occurs as emotional and cognitive hindrances are cleared from the mind. Activities like study, meditation, and creating books or medicines were part of his methods. 14 of his commentaries were translated into Tibetan, and the Shiksha-samukaya exists in Sanskrit and Tibetan translations, though another text, the Sutra Samuchaya, is lost. Importantly, the mind and body are fundamentally distinct. Physical ailments cause suffering because the mind identifies with them. Transforming this identification and the resultant suffering requires rigorous mental training, suggesting that the mind can learn to process and even adopt external pains through disciplined practice. When people shift their focus of attachment, their experiences of suffering and pain also change. Maitriyogan demonstrated this when he felt pain and showed a wound on his body where a dog had been injured. In another story, Siddhartha, the future Buddha, comforted a swan injured by his cousin Devadatta, claiming the bird by right of his compassion. Machig Labdrun, known for the meditative practice Chod, offered her own body to spirits as sustenance. Shantideva in his work argued using logical necessity, not moral sentiment, that helping others is essential because suffering benefits no one. Furthermore, the causal relationship in events can't be fully explained by reason, though the process is consistent. Nagarjuna's verse emphasizes that consciousness is a continuous flow of moments, without an underlying enduring entity. Khenpo Kumpel addresses readers of all genders in his commentary, but uses the masculine pronoun for simplicity, reflecting Shantideva's monastic context. The bibliography lists several Sanskrit commentaries on the Bodhicharyavatara, mostly preserved in the Tibetan Tengyur, with one full commentary by Prajnacaramati surviving in Sanskrit. References include editions cited from the Tibetan Tripitaka and important guides by Alaka Chattopadhyaya and Tarthang Tulku. The works of various authors such as Dipankara, Vibhutachandra, and Dharmapala are detailed with their respective identifiers. The text is a list of various translations and commentaries on Buddhist works, specifically focusing on works like the Bodhicharyavatara and teachings of important Buddhist figures such as Shantideva and the Dalai Lama. These translations are available in multiple languages, including English, French, and Tibetan, and are meant to make these ancient texts accessible to a broader audience. The list includes specific editions, publishers, translators, and details of some noteworthy publications. The text is a comprehensive list of various translations and commentaries on Buddhist texts, particularly focusing on the Bodhicharyavatara and other works by significant Buddhist scholars. It includes translations from Sanskrit and Tibetan to English and French, with works published by various publishers like Padmakara, Shambhala Publications, and Snow Lion Publications. The list also mentions translators, the year of publication, and the original sources for some commentaries, including the names of prominent figures such as Dilgo Khyentse, the Dalai Lama, and Patrul Rinpoche. Key topics include Buddhist philosophy, the path of enlightenment, and histories of Buddhism. Several important Buddhist texts have been published by Shambhala Publications and other publishers, focusing on teachings from various revered teachers and scholars. These texts include Longchen Yeshe Dorje's Treasury of Precious Qualities, Shantideva's The Way of the Bodhisattva, and Jamgon Mipham's White Lotus. Additionally, there are two commentaries on wisdom by Khenchen Kunzang Pelden and Minyak Kunzang Sonam, and Dilgo Khyentse's works, The Wish-Fulfilling Jewel and Dzurchungpa's Testament. The Words of My Perfect Teacher by Patrul Rinpoche is also noted. These publications offer a broad range of perspectives and teachings within the Buddhist tradition.